The Lost Year, Chapter 8, Behavior. Merlin hadn't dealt directly with many of the visiting nobles before. Gwen had been assigned to Lady Vivian, and Merlin hadn't been made to serve anyone during the tournament when Valiant had been trying to kill Arthur. There had been that mess with Bayard, but she'd spent the majority of it fighting for her life, and she hadn't served anyone but Arthur before that. That was not the case this time. They were a little strapped for people, with a good portion of the castle staff still recovering from burns earned when the dragon attacked. Burns were always slow to heal. It made for more work for everyone, Merlin especially. She was assisting Gaius and serving Arthur and Lady Emma. Honestly, Merlin was lucky the steward had finally found someone to serve as Arthur's manservant. George was pleasant enough. Like her, he had not grown up in Camelot proper, but was actually also from Estir, though he'd been living in Mercia with a cousin for some years. The only problem with him was that he was horribly proper, having been trained to be a servant in Mercia. Merlin hadn't asked why he'd come to Camelot. She would someday, but she suspected it might be for a similar reason as to why she'd come to Camelot, or rather, the reason most people thought they knew. He wanted better prospects. Mercia wasn't a bad place to be, but Camelot had need of people more than they did. And she knew the steward wasn't getting any younger. George would be perfect for that position once he got familiar with the other servants here. At the moment, there was only one thing any of those servants were talking about, though. Gwen had been assigned to help serve Lord Gedrick. Now, normally, something like this wouldn't be big news. Gwen had grown up with her mother in service to Sir Leon's family, learning the ins and outs of service since she was old enough to speak. It was why she had been assigned to Lady Morgana in the first place. She was not the problem. Rumor in the servants' passages was that Gedrig was the issue. He'd visited Camelot before, several years ago. Many of the servants still working here remembered him and avoided him like he had the plague, especially the women. Merlin grew suspicious after the first day, mostly because after lunch, Gwen started avoiding her. Gwen never avoided her. They often did many of their more menial chores together to fight off the monotony, but also to spread the gossip of the day. The fact that Gwen was avoiding her set her on edge, and that more than anything was what made her spot what was happening. Gedrig was standing near the edge of the courtyard, with Gwen against a wall. He wasn't pinning her there with anything but a look, but that look made Merlin's skin crawl as she crept closer to hear what the Lord was saying. "I do hope you've thought of my generous offer, pretty girl." He practically simpered. Merlin's eyes narrowed. "You are most generous, my lord, but I cannot simply leave Camelot." Gwen was tactful and quaking. "But as my bed warmer, you would have silk sheets instead of ones to scrub," he wheedled, and Merlin felt bile rise in her throat as Gwen tried valiantly to have the stone wall swallow her whole. "My lord, I am already courting a young man," Gwen said, and in that instant Merlin knew that wasn't what the young lord wanted to hear. "And he is better than I, a lord, insolent bitch." Merlin sped up and stepped between the two just as Lord Gedrick swung at Gwen backhanded. The slap took Merlin full in the face, only because Gwen was so close to the wall. Merlin's head snapped backward, and she let the force of it carry her to the ground, crying out loudly enough to get the attention of everyone in the courtyard. Her laundry basket went flying, scattering Arthur's clean clothes and providing something of a barrier between the Lord and Gwen, small though it was. With this turn of events, the Lord backed off as Merlin clutched a hand to her now bleeding nose. "We will continue this conversation," he hissed at Gwen, surely thinking that Merlin was too distracted to be listening. She frowned as Gwen dropped to her knees and pulled out a handkerchief to help Merlin staunch her bleeding nose. A knock sounded at Arthur's door, and he called for them to enter. He was just going over some paperwork. He blinked as the door opened to Lady Emma. She was an older lady, recently widowed. She wore black as a sign of mourning for her late husband, Lord Richard. She was still a handsome woman, though she had some gray coming into her chestnut brown hair. Her deep-set green eyes were serious. Arthur stood, inclining his head to her respectfully. "Lady Emma, To what do I owe the pleasure? He asked, for once genuine. Lady Emma was lovely. Her son was settling in as Arthur's new squire. Galahad was set to be knighted the day before the nobles left. I am sorry to disturb you, Prince Arthur, but I believe someone may be abusing the serving staff, Lady Emma said. Arthur tensed. This is serious indeed. I'm glad you came to me. How did you come to this conclusion? Arthur asked, sitting back down and nodding to the chair across from him. Lady Emma, however, did not sit. Instead, she stuck her head out into the hallway. Willis, dear, will you please escort her in? I swear to you, my dear, nothing bad will happen to you. She called, and 2 pairs of footsteps came up to the door, one the solid march of a knight in training, the other lagging. Arthur expected one of the newer servants who'd been popping up, maybe one of those injured in the dragon attack and mistaken for an injury inflicted with intent. What he did not expect was Merlin to shuffle in, eyes fixed on her shoes, hair loose so it covered most of her face. Merlin, he said, halfway rising. Oh, you know her? Lady Emma said, hesitating slightly. I'm his maidservant, Merlin mumbled, then belatedly added, my lady. Oh, Lady Emma said, frowning. My maidservant whom I haven't seen more than a glimpse of in 2 days. Arthur clarified. The hesitation on Lady Emma's face cleared slightly. I see. Why is that? Lady Emma asked, folding her arms, looking at Arthur rather than Merlin. I thought it was because she was serving you, Lady Emma. Am I to believe that is not the case? Arthur asked, his tone prying. That sweet Guinevere girl has been serving me these past 2 days, Emma said, her frown growing. I wish to ask Merlin if I had done something to make her uncomfortable. I've always been rather close with my maids and did not wish to harm any of the maids of Camelot, as they have always been sweet to me, but... Emma trailed off. Arthur's patience snapped. Merlin, look at me, he demanded. I really don't want to, she said, a bit of her usual bite to her tone. Arthur stood and strode over to her in 3 quick strides, giving her no time to backtrack. Gently, he tucked his hand under her chin and tilted her face up. Rage boiled through his veins. Merlin's lip was split. Her nose was red and irritated, but that was nothing to the 2 black eyes that stood out against snow-pale skin. The bruises were spectacularly purple, starting at her nose and encasing a good majority of her face. Arthur's mind raced. Who? But the answer had already occurred to him. You swapped with Gwen. Gedrig did this. He nearly snarled it. Merlin caught his hand before he could storm out of the room to confront the lord. You don't have enough proof, Arthur, she said. He scoffed. Your face is purple, Merlin. He was gentle as he cupped her cheek, forgetting Lady Emma was even in the room, let alone her son. And that will not be enough proof for your father. I'm just a servant Uther will not care. You can't know that, Arthur said, his voice only halfway certain. Yes, I can. This isn't the first time Gedrig has done this. No one ever listens when it's just the servants getting hurt, Arthur. It's not about to change now. Merlin pulled back and curtsied before leaving the room. Arthur felt rage curl up in his stomach. When it's just a servant's word against a noble, your father will not listen. It's why I came to you, my prince, Emma said, stepping forward. But I have a thought that will have Gedrig caught red-handed. What say you? What did you have in mind? Arthur asked, more than ready to go with the lady's plan.